Welcome, everyone. This is Anthro-Lore, Catalogs and Archives of Myths, Legends, and Folklore. I'm Alex, and I'm here with...
I'm Buck, again. This time you've actually heard me before.
And I'm Nolani, and we're going to have a fun time today.
Yeah, now we're talking about vampires again, but we're talking about the Western and European vampire. And our thoughts.
Mostly the pop culture and how they've sort of changed how we view vampires. Because Bram Stoker wanted vampires to be sexy.
They were sexy before him, though.
Debatable.
I
That's
think
what we're
it
here
depends
for.
on what you're into.
I'm not into bloated corpses.
I don't know, I've heard them where they get out of the bloated corpse stage and then they want to impregnate people and sleep with them. You know.
I mean, well, who wants to... I took notes on a fictional vampire clan, so, I mean, I guess I can start.
Go for it.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you've played Skyrim and you played the Dawn Guard DLC, you know of the Volek vampire clan. They're supposed to be the most powerful vampire clan in all of Tamriel, but that's debatable. I think they suck. So, basically, they're your generic Western vampire with a few key differences that I really liked that sort of harken more back to the proto-vampire myths where they're more bestial.
Mm-hmm.
But it also came with a lot of questionable information in the game itself that I never saw implemented. There was a book called, I didn't write down the specific title, but it was the Vampires of Skyrim. And it lists off all these different clans and different strains of the vampire disease. Mm-hmm. And it says that the Volek vampire clan can freeze people's breath with their blood, lived under the ice in frozen lakes, and could reach through the ice to pull people through and kill them. Never saw it happen. Kind of sounds like something a vampire would write to make themselves sound cooler.
Do they die being dragged through the ice, or after when the vampire gets them and then just sucks them dry?
See, it never specifically mentions what happens. It just says that they can pull people through the ice to get them. Mm. And honestly, it sounds like they phase through the ice and then pull the person forcefully through the ice. And I'm pretty sure that would kill you. It also goes on, there's a lot of proven things. They're a completely different strain of vampire, because in this universe, it's disease-based. But there's 3 different strains. There's hypoxia, I think is one of them. Sanguinarian is the disease strain they have. And then there's a third one that I can't remember because it was a lot of Latin. And I'm not good at speaking English or dead languages. The head of the vampire clan were originally purebloods who were given the gift of vampirism from the Daedric prince Molag Bal, the prince of domination and rape, who also created the first vampire by raping a woman who then died and then came back as a vampire. Those with the pure blood look more bat-like. They have a big brow ridge, sort of an upturned nose, and pointed ears despite not being elves. And the lack of blood doesn't kill them, but it'll put them into sort of a comatose state, or even before that, it sort of makes them feral and crave blood, but they don't need it to survive, which is weird. That's usually been a key factor in vampires. Blood is their life essence. They don't need to eat anything else, they need blood. And then, finally, a pureblood vampire can turn into a giant bat monster, a vampire lord. Mm-hmm. And the one weirdest thing that I found was they can be cured of their vampirism, which seems strange and out of place for vampires, but when I looked up the cures, most of them were just killing them. Mm-hmm. One of the potions was 6 cloves of garlic and all these other toxic things, and they're like, it will cure you of your vampirism. And then they drink it, get poisoned, and die. It's like, oh, you're cured. You're not a vampire anymore. But yeah, that's what I learned. They're also not killed by sunlight, it just weakens them.
Okay, so I've played Skyrim a little bit, and I'm not the person definitely to give recommendations on games, but based off of like when you become a vampire, because I did that like mission, you could still turn into like the beast bat creature, even though like, would you still be considered a pureblood even though you were turned?
I remember that story because I have no life, and I've basically spent my entire time in Tamriel and Skyrim. But the Harkin, the vampire lord, bestows his blood to you, so you have pure vampire blood.
Okay.
But it's sort of you're a lesser pure blood. It's like it's like a patriarchal family. The head of the family is the highest up beneath Molag Bal, and his descendants are purebloods, but they're lesser. They don't have his strength.
Okay.
I just thought, I also feel like the fact that you become a pure-blooded vampire despite not getting it from Molag Bal or whatever, or the devil, is the essential equivalent, is a gameplay thing because it'd be boring to be a normal vampire and not a vampire lord.
That makes sense.
It's more of a gameplay thing. There's also another cure, werewolf. Becoming a werewolf cures you of becoming a vampire, but that just gives you more problems.
I like it. It's kind of weird. Like, say if you're like 1,000-year-old vampire and then you get cured, wouldn't you just die right after that? Because like.
Yeah, I thought that too. One of the main characters in that storyline is approximately 4,000 years old, and you can cure her, and then she's just fine. I'm like, no, because like she was born a vampire and grew up to whatever age and then stopped aging. So like, is becoming a vampire like embalming yourself? Or because like, I feel like it changes story to story where certain vampires can reproduce.
Yeah.
At least pure blood vampires can reproduce, but wouldn't their children's be babies forever?
Not necessarily. I mean, that goes to like what you're looking at. Like, I know in pop culture now, it's because like, you know, Dracula can have children because he made a deal with the devil. He's kind of in a sense a demon and not necessarily like what we think of a vampire. He's more like,
he's the progenitor of all vampires,
Yeah.
basically. He's something greater. Everything else is lesser.
yeah, he's the pure blood. Pure bloods can have children, other ones cannot.
Because they're actually dead.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a key thing with the Western vampire stories. Because when you contract vampirism in the Elder Scrolls games, it takes 3 days for the disease to turn you into a vampire. On the 3rd day, you die in your sleep and you wake up an undead. So, curing that seems kind of hard. Like, curing the initial stages, sure, you have a disease. But after that 3rd day where you literally die and then come back, I don't think you can uncure.
I mean, magic?
Well, that's true. There's a lot of magic in the Elder Scrolls.
You know, I think like 3 days is like the magic number or something like that. Because in The Lost Boys, at least, like as long as you don't feed on like human blood in the first 3 days, like you could cure yourself of becoming a vampire, which includes killing the head vampire of like that. I don't want to say like clan, but like
I feel like
of that strand of vampire.
Is that what you call a group of vampire? I feel like that's. Oh.
Got an idea over here.
Because I've always heard vampires referred to in groups as a clan, despite not being related.
And like even in like True Blood, it's like weird how it definitely seems like incest or something like that. Because it's like you're like my brother, my son, and something like that. Like I forget exactly what.
That's
he
a
says.
weird combination of words you used there. my brother, and my son.
I forget what exactly he said, but it translates like into like relative.
Are you talking about when he got changed? Like
Yeah.
Alexander? What's his
Yeah.
name? Yeah.
I forget what it. Godric or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said something, and then like later in the seasons or whatever, you see Eric and like his sister, which is like his vampire sister, not his real sister, and it's like becoming a vampire changes the whole thing about like a family tree.
Dynamic. Okay, so A group of vampires is called a clutch, a coven, a pack, a clan, or a brood.
A brood?
Oh, yeah,
Broad.
maybe it's brood.
I think it's
A broad is I thought a woman.
That's what you call a woman you're not familiar with, but you don't like.
No, yeah, it is a brood. My bad.
Okay. Those are some interesting animal terms for people.
You could also, like, get very confused, like, if referring to a vampire clan as, like, a coven or...
Well, I feel like it ties back to the witchcraft of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know in the last time we tried recording this discussion, we talked about how witches were the progenitors of vampirism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of that same alley of deals with the devil, black magic, that's a coven.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that makes sense. Clans, for me, make sense because it's sort of a family, but they don't have to be connected by blood.
Yeah.
It's
They kind of are in a sense because you use at least your blood to change them into that, and then it's kind of like that
it's not blood in the same sense.
Yeah, not
but
DNA related.
The head of the clan's blood is what runs through everyone beneath them.
Mm-hmm.
And then clutch.
Mm-hmm.
The clutch is weird. That sounds like a group of eggs.
I was just thinking like cars.
I was thinking like of a purse, like a clutch purse.
We all have very different interpretations of that word.
And then a pack.
A pack.
I'm
See
thinking
that
wolves.
Yeah.
that sort of ties back more to what you said in the previous episode with the thing I can't pronounce.
Vricolikas.
The Vricolikas, because I feel like at least in Europe, that has to be the root of both vampire and werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know in some stories they're the same. And then there's that split where they came from the same thing and split off. And now they're rivals.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where pack would come from. Because bats don't really fly in packs. They fly in swarms.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no real social hierarchy in bats at all, though. Because they're bats. They're not a very social animal. I'm probably wrong.
Have you ever seen Little Vampire?
Oh my god.
I love that movie.
I have not seen that.
It's like this little kid, his family, I think, moves to Scotland or something like that. And there's this vampire and this like little kid vampire, and they like become friends or something like that. And there's this weird vampire hunter or something, and the kid tries saving the whole family of vampires from this hunter. And then, spoiler alert, the whole family gets turned back to human by the end of the movie, even though despite being like thousands and thousands of years old.
See, that's always like the problem when you see like a vampire and they're like, I want to shed this curse. I'm like, you want to turn into dust? It's like, oh yes, I was alive in the Elizabethan era. I'm like, dude, you're a corpse, man. You stop drinking that blood, you're bones.
Well, I mean, it might be better to, go and relish in like sweet death instead of keep living on and be like, blood.
Do you think that like being cured of vampirism really just like stops your immortality, so then you just begin aging again instead of like you rapidly age to whatever?
I feel like it's kind of like a genie monkey paw situation where a vampire wishes for a cure, and that cure is in the form of a wooden stake. It cures them of their immortality and their curse.
Yeah.
And I've seen that trope sort of pop up in stories, not specifically with vampires, but like a man's daughter becomes a werewolf, and he prays to the gods like, I want to cure my daughter of her lycanthropy, and one of the spiteful gods gives him an axe.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, here's your cure, kill her.
I guess, yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of the trend with vampire cures. It's like, well,
I mean, in a sense, yeah, it is a cure, like, because really you just want to, like, end suffering, and sometimes...
you want to stop outliving your loved ones.
Yeah.
That's when you just change them.
Which, quick side note that I learned in psychology, suicide is actually highest among the elders because they see, like, everyone, like, they're just outliving everybody, and...
Man, that must suck to be a vampire who's not, like, hedonistic. Because, like, if you're not living it up in the highest moment and you don't care about anybody but yourself, literally knowing everybody you ever know is going to die before you must suck.
I mean, that's kind of like Louis from Interview with a Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
He he was depressed. He tried committing suicide until Lestat found him, and Lestat's like, I hate humans. I'm gonna
give you a gift.
I'm gonna give you a gift. And Louis like, no, please don't. And then he's just in suffering the entire book.
And what's sad is though, like, as Louis almost found like the thing to make him live forever. Like, he had a vampire daughter. Like, maybe
Claudia
would have had a wife. Like, and some vampires just got jealous and were like in the same situation of like, I can't look like I'm like humanizing, like having emotions or anything, like being sad that I'm outliving everybody. But
I think it's an interesting take on the concept of immortality too. I think it's the whole idea of a vampire is like, I want to live forever. Joke's on you, you're a monster. It's that sort of be careful what you wish for story. Except then it turned into its own story. So, I have a question. Why don't vampires just make more vampires?
because then they don't have anything
Is it just
to eat.
Well, they don't have anything to eat, and then plus like you pass on this curse. Like, what if you don't want to inflict pain on others? And it's kind of like Frankenstein's Bride. She didn't want to become it, and she like ditched Frankenstein's monster in the end anyway. So,
we call him Adam. He has a name.
Sorry.
I like
Modern day-
Frankenstein better. I mean, gives him a little bit of character.
Well, we could call him a modern day Prometheus.
I kind of want to like ask them that question because at least like in the book and not compared to the movie, like he was very upset with Frankenstein, like the monster.
Yeah,
upset
he
with
was very
Frankenstein.
articulate.
So would he be offended now that everyone, pretty much on Earth, is referring to him as Frankenstein?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, even in funny comedy movies, he's called Frankenstein or Frankie, and it's like, dude, there's the whole book was about this.
Yeah.
He's his son, who didn't want to be born.
Yeah.
And then his dad was like, "Oh God, I made a monster." He's like,
and
"Yeah."
abandons him.
In the Antarctic. No, he goes to the Antarctic.
He goes to the Antarctic.
Or
and
does he
his
go to the
passionate son comes and finds him and demands he give him life.
A wife.
A wife.
Anyway, we're off topic again. We're getting into the
Vampires. Back to vampires.
We can talk about Frankenstein in the next episode about zombies.
I love Frankenstein so much. The monster.
Okay, so I mean, Western vampires, despite having common roots, all have really different exaggerated traits and abilities. Like, we tried doing this last time, and it didn't really work out because it sort of went on for an hour.
I think it, depending on the intended audience, like the type of vampire, I guess you could say, changes. Like sometimes, yeah, it's like all about love and they hate who they are or whatever. And then sometimes it's kind of like, I am what I am. I'm going to embrace it. Like if you're wanting more of a horror, like.
It's time to be a monster.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, the living suck. I'm immortal. I'm going to live it up in my cool castle with all my friends, and we're going to just occasionally eat people.
Yeah.
So, fun fact, vampires used to be seen as only being women.
Really?
Yeah, so, like, they were credited for spreading, like, the plague. In, like, the Black Plague era.
Interesting. But didn't we talk about, like, kind of a little bit, at least when we tried recording this last time, that, like, the first vampire or something was a witch who wanted immortality, and so she tried to, like, make a spell, and it kind of backfired, and...
See, now...
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Nope, never mind. I'm not going to say I was going to bring up Lilith, and then...
You can't say those words yet. Our professor will crucify us.
It's a touchy subject, but, I mean, I feel like we can't just cut that part out of history where people thought...
Well,
that she was, but...
here's what I'm thinking. Going back to other discussions we've had that we haven't recorded, but that whole idea of men taking an empowered woman's story like Medusa or the Sirens and then twisting it into monster stories. Does that mean somewhere way back when vampires weren't bad, weren't seen as an evil thing, and were instead possibly a story of empowerment that was then warped through time and the patriarchy?
I mean, quite possibly. Sorry,
Yeah,
didn't mean to
no,
cut you
go
off.
ahead. Like, yeah, but I think definitely how the story can be warped, at least, like, with Lilith, like, just because she kind of didn't like, what am I
She
thinking?
didn't let-
Voluntarily left Eden. They thought, like, oh, she's a terrible person, like, nobody should ever want to leave, and then it was kind of like, we're going to say all these bad things about her.
She didn't follow Adam's, like, orders and instructions, and, like, she didn't bow down.
She literally didn't want to live under Adam, like.
Yeah.
Like it's like goes to like the Medusa story. It's like, oh, well, she was raped in the temple of Athena, and then Athena gave her the power to never be harmed by a man again.
Mm-hmm.
And then her visage is used as a symbol for a women's shelter in all of ancient Greece. And then men were like, actually, she's a monster.
So,
And
oh, sorry.
no, go for it.
So, right before Bram Stoker's Dracula, there was a novella written about a female vampire that was named Carmilla. And it was about, she would, like, go after women. And it was about, like, lesbianism and, you know, wanting to be with another woman. And she was frowned upon, and she was, you know, beheaded and killed in the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where Dracula, you know, he's like this guy who does the same thing to, like, women, but he's seen as kind of like, oh yeah, he's sexy, he's a hero, but a woman does it, and like,
She's a
oh,
monster.
no.
Yeah. And I think, like, especially nowadays, it's like, even women would kind of, like, not agree with that now because they think it's like, oh, yeah.
Well, it's also that predatory lesbian myth, kind of.
Yeah. Which I'm, like, so weird about, like, because just because somebody likes the same sex doesn't mean, like, they're after you. Like, quit being so selfish.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, that doesn't mean you're attractive all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's like straight men whenever they're around gay men.
Mhm.
They're like, hey, don't hit on me. It's like, oh, well.
You ain't that cute.
But yeah, I see, now I want to read that story because that sounds like a really good story, although I'm probably going to find problems with it
Yeah.
because it's going to end sad, like every lesbian story does.
It was written by a French, I believe it's a French man, Joseph Sheridan Le Fany?
Now I'm less excited. I'm very...
Yo, you know what's coming out that I want to see? What a man wants. I never wanted to see What a Woman Wants or whatever the one was with the one guy. But I love Tazari P. Henson and, like, the thought of, like, just, like, that reverse role of a woman actually, like, being in that part and, like, knowing what a man wants. Sounds interesting. But that's just me. I mean, just based off of this whole conversation right now, like, I feel like
this
that was
conversation is
appropriate.
getting in some...
Anyway.
We're touching some weird social aspects right now, but I mean, that's anthropology.
Yeah.
It's
weird.
I want to research the origin of the woman vampire now, because now I'm pretty damn sure they weren't doing anything wrong, and then that story gets warped. Damn it!
Do you think that, like, it's still, like, if women were still the first vampire, do you think it would still have, like, that aggressiveness that, like, if a man in power would have, or do you think it's still kind of, like...
I feel like the story would be sort of warped into the way of, like, women's wiles, that sort of, like, women can get what they want by tricking the men, using their feminine wiles and that sort of thing, and that's... I can kind of see where that comes from in vampires now, using their charm. Especially if the original vampires were women, that whole seduce and get what you want, and then, a bite, you're dead thing kind of makes more sense.
Well, Bram Stoker was influenced by that story about the female vampire. That's where he got how Dracula uses his charm.
See, that makes a lot more sense now. See, I'm getting into the history of stuff, and now we're putting the pieces together. We solved vampires. They were better when they were women and not Republicans. There goes half our audience.
Oh my gosh.
But should we... So last time, or when we were speaking, that got deleted.
The lost episode.
Yes. That is literally lost. We'll never find it. It's not like 3-4 years from now. The lost episode comes out.
No, it's gone.
It is gone.
It's for everyone's benefit.
But kind of how we wanted to, like, generalize vampires in like Western culture where it was like what
The general vampire.
yeah, like
Joe
your basic
vampire.
yeah. Average Joe.
So I think that's something we're gonna have to come back to.
Mhm.
Because we sort of hit on the general vibe of like, here's the history of vampires, here's some pop culture vampires.
Yeah.
I feel like this is something we're gonna have to come back to with more information.
Definitely, like after hearing that story, the story about Camilla. Not
I want to just do a thing on that now.
Mhm.
I think come October we should do one just on Camilla
Mhm.
because that sounds like a fun story. There's
That
no
means I
movie
actually
about
have to read
Camilla.
it, but
It's a novella. It's short, so.
I have trouble reading Lovecraft stories sometimes, but that's mostly because of he was a bad writer, kind of.
So I don't know if you guys want to know this. You can cut this out if you want. But there's some interesting fact about garlic.
Oh,
So-
I do want to hear this.
So garlic is a traditional vampire repellent, and it's been used for protection for over like 2,000 years.
Mhm.
And it goes back to like the Egyptians, the Romans, Prussia. The Egyptians thought that garlic was a gift from God, and the Romans thought that it gave them courage, like the soldiers thought it gave them courage.
Mhm.
And German miners thought that it would protect them from evil spirits when they went underground.
Just combined all three of those, you got
Yeah.
vampire repellent.
Yeah, and then even brides used to carry garlic underneath their clothes as protection. And garlic was used as like medicine back in the day because it's a natural antibiotic. So you have something that is like, yeah, it cures me, and that bloated, ugly-looking corpse filled with disease is coming at me. Oh yeah, it's gonna stay away.
That actually makes a lot more sense. I haven't really researched the background of garlic because that's a really obscure thing to research. But with all of that, that makes a lot of logical sense. It's like, it's like silver being a holy metal.
Mhm.
It's antimicrobial. It literally would kill a corpse if you shoved it in it. It kills all the bacteria. It makes sense. So that's why it's good against vampires. Not so sure about werewolves, but that's September.
Mhm.
We have our whole schedule planned out.
Yeah.
And another weird random fact is that the Twilight books, right?
Oh boy.
Written by
Sure.
Stephanie Meyer. She actually did no research on vampires. That's
It
why they
shows.
all
It-
sparkle and
Walk in the daylight
Yeah.
and do everything that's opposite of what vampire is.
yeah.
The superhuman strength and I
It
don't.
was stupid playing baseball in the storm. It's dumb.
Why would vampires even play
I
baseball?
don't know.
Yeah.
I think we should call it here. I think this is a very loose, nice discussion opposed to the
It got real intense.
yeah, we had arguments. I think we fought a little bit.
I'm still curious whether or not dinosaurs are living underground as vampires.
We can't keep giving them hints like this about what happened. Somebody's gonna demand to know, and we're just gonna have to redo it. But
That will be a conversation we could discuss. If you think whether or not dinosaurs are still living in
then what's oil?
somewhere,
What's oil then?
the vampires that got staked.
So there's a dinosaur Van Helsing out there in the caves?
Yes.
But wait, no, he couldn't because he'd have to be undead.
No, it's what's
a
his
caveman.
name?
Let's see the Iceman.
No, the guy with the glasses, Jeff Goldblum. It was
You're
him.
calling Jeff Goldblum the dinosaur hunter. Okay.
Alright.
That's a little taste of what we had last time. So that was our discussion.
Yay.
Vampires.
Yeah.
So if you guys, just comment.
Like, subscribe, you know what to do.
Yeah.
Give us
Everybody ask for it.
suggestions.
Yeah, give us suggestions and tell us in the comments what your favorite vampire is.
Yeah. We'd love to talk. We do want to do a fan month based on like suggestions and stuff, discussions you guys have. So like, comment, subscribe. Patreon doesn't exist yet. Might exist. Who knows? Give us money. Bye.